So Peter Carey is in the transfer portal. What does this mean for Syracuse?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everyone, into this special edition of the Locked On Syracuse Podcast. I'm Jackson Holzer. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we have some breaking news. Peter Carey, the big fella, is in the transfer portal. How does Syracuse plan on replacing him? What does this do for the program in general? Well, for these next few minutes, we're going to discuss all that. All right. The big takeaway with Peter Carey putting his name in the transfer portal is that this opens up a roster spot for Syracuse. It opens up a roster spot. Now, the reason why this is important is because every team in the NCAA is allowed a certain number of scholarship athletes. And now that Peter Carey has decided to enter the transfer portal, Syracuse has 10 scholarship players heading into next season. That includes the freshmen coming in, which are Elijah Moore and Donnie Freeman. You're allowed 13 at the max. So that means there are 3 roster spots available for Syracuse right now. Peter Carey came to the Orange. He was a high-end 3-star recruit on ESPN. And, well, he's 6'11", 200 pounds. Had high hopes for the kid, maybe, that he can develop. Jesse Edwards developed from being a 3-star recruit. But at the end of the day, Peter Carey couldn't carve out a role for Syracuse, despite them having a big need at center. Right? His first season doesn't really see the floor much at all. But you figure there's going to be that leap in year 2. And, well, wasn't. There wasn't. He averaged less than a point a game, less than a rebound a game. He saw the floor for only 14 games. He missed some time with a concussion. We wish Peter Carey nothing but the best, but what this will do is open up another roster spot for Syracuse, which is important to say the least, because at the end of the day, these players are allowed to stay and go as they please. Can't just kick someone off the team for being bad or for not being good. And I don't want to say that he was bad or whatever, like that, but the point is that just because a player is averaging 1 point a game doesn't mean you can say, we're no longer having you on the team. Can't do that. So he decides that I guess it was the best for himself, that he's going to go elsewhere. My best guess is he goes to the mid-major, tries to find a starting role there, and then maybe, who knows, he carves himself a role there and comes back to the Power 6. It's funny because the episode that is dropping tomorrow, a full podcast with Inside the Loud House editor Neil Adler, the news broke right then and there, and we talked a little bit about Peter Carey off the top. But the big takeaway is it opens up a roster spot for Syracuse. Now, in terms of what the Orange do with that roster spot, we're going to talk all about it right after this. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The North Carolina Tar Heels can only be described as an armada. The 1 seed is as hardcore as it gets out there, so it's no wonder they secured a spot in the Sweet 16 this Thursday against Alabama in the NCAA tournament. They're a favorite picked by many to make a run for a championship. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Bracket already busted? Tired of the same old daily fantasy grind where you make a roster, cross your fingers, and hope for the best, or losing on the last leg of your pick'em entry? Introducing Bettor Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs talent and you can play with your friends, not against them. Pick more or less or real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social DFS movement. And hey, you can even play with me. We can team up and beat the competition. My username is JPH52. Send me a friend request and let's get started. Download Bettor Together now from the App Store and sign up using promo code LOCKEDON for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember the code LOCKEDON because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. Welcome back, everyone, in the Locked On Syracuse podcast for this special edition with Peter Carey entering his name into the transfer portal. And the main thing with that is it clears up a roster spot for Syracuse. The Orange currently have 10 scholarship players on their roster heading into next season. That includes having freshman 4-star Elijah Moore and 5-star Donnie Freeman in there. You're allowed 13 under NCAA rules, so there's 3 open spots available. Now, we've talked a lot about here on this podcast about the big man conundrum. I don't think that this move really impacts it all too much, and the big man conundrum being if they bring in a center, what happens to Malik Brown and Donnie Freeman? Who gets to start? And that's a question for Poll Friday, really. But now you have more lack of depth at the center position. You have Naheem McLeod coming back from injury, and at the very least, he's going to have some sort of role, whether you bring in a center or not. And outside of that, you have William Patterson, who is going into his second year. He certainly seems like he has the tools, but we haven't seen anything from Patterson yet to suggest that he will or won't be an impactful college basketball player. We just know that he's 7'2" and that he's long and that he's athletic, but we don't know much else. We've never seen him play. So those are the only 2 centers on the roster right now with Peter Carey leaving. I think that opens the door now more for Syracuse to bring in a big man. At the very least, a backup caliber big man, which it probably would be an upgrade over Peter Carey. Peter Carey only played about 5 minutes a game in 14 games, averaged less than a point and a rebound a game. So at the very least, this is an extra incentive that Syracuse has to bring in a big man, whether it's a starter or not, because next season, I don't think you can go into next season with your only centers on the roster being Naheem McLeod and William Patterson. I think you're setting yourself up for failure there. Unless you truly believe that William Patterson can be that dude next year. I just think it's a recipe for disaster because how do you rebound? You're not going to play Naheem McLeod more than 10 to 15 minutes. He's never done that in his career. We don't know anything about William Patterson, so I guess you might be rolling with Donnie Freeman and Malik Brown in the front court, but that's not, there's not a lot of size there. So at the very least, you got to bring in someone. I think a guy like Justice Ajabo from Harvard, now he might not even be top 100 anymore in the transfer portal. He's the Harvard center. He would be an upgrade for sure, whether you play him as a starter or not. He's someone that is a little bit under the radar. That makes a lot of sense outside of the big names out there. What I'm really saying is Peter Carey leaving doesn't mean that Syracuse is now going to go after Maxime Renaud from Stanford, right? It doesn't have much of an impact. If Maxime Renaud wanted to come here or Syracuse wants him, again, we don't know anything on that. Peter Carey leaving or staying doesn't impact that. But what it does do is it means that Syracuse is probably more likely now to seek, at the very least, another backup caliber center so that they have a little bit more depth on the roster. And the good news with that is chances are he should be an upgrade over Peter Carey. So at the end of the day, Peter Carey transfers. It means that Syracuse has 10 of 13 scholarship spots. They now have 2 scholarship centers. That's Naheem McLeod and William Patterson. And you have to figure they're probably going to bring in one more, whether that's a big fish like Maxime Renaud or Terrace Reed from Michigan. Or they're going to bring in someone who is maybe a lesser name, but someone who can provide them good minutes next season. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening to this special edition of the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Like and subscribe. I will release the podcast with Neil Adler tomorrow at 9 a.m., where literally we talk about the Peter Carey news right off the bat because it happened as soon as we recorded it. So stay tuned for that. Take care, everyone.